you know,
Yeah.
very, very different. Like you just mentioned before, a superintendent of the railways, like we used to call it Castle in Melbourne, you know, the big Spencer Street station, that's up Castle, you know. But you always had respect for people. Like you had the superintendent, you had the, just different. Now it's all quite different, like with the hierarchy and.
But it existed, Andy. It existed, and Doug. It existed at various levels. Like you had your hierarchy, even in the shunt yard. You had your senior shunters, and they wanted respect. You had so many different nationalities. When I went to Mile End shunting in Enginemen, there was, I think, at one stage we added up 18 countries represented in that shunt yard. You know, there was Turks, there was French, there was Italians, Greeks, Irish. You know, the Russians. They were all there, and that's because that was a carryover from the repatriation after World War II, that the railways actually became a great employer of overseas nationalities. You know, so it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, actually, you're right, because a lot of the the drivers, my regular mate, Mick Stankovic, was from Yugoslavia.
Sorry, got to jump. I went to school with his son, Ken.
Oh, well, Ken ended up in the outlaw motorcycle scene.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, he ended up, like I ended up riding bikes and hanging with a few of the boys from that side of the world back in Adelaide and Melbourne. But yeah, Ken, he was always telling me about, God rest Mick's soul, he was always telling me about his son. He's riding with, I forget the name of the outlaw club in Adelaide he's riding. He said, but, hey, and excuse me if anyone's watching, but he would wee on his jacket and rub it in the dirt. Back in the day, they wanted to be all gruff and dirty. He said, oh, man, he goes, I don't know what's going on with him. And Mick was a big, red-haired Yugoslavian gentleman that had a temper to go with it. And I don't think we were the best match because I was pretty fiery back then. And the big vision I have of Mick is this big fist banging the pedestal on the 930 Elco when he had to put a point across. He'd be like, oh, bang, and everything would be shaking, or he'd be yelling at a shunter at Tail and Bend. Oh, my God, it was like, great guy. I loved him. But, yeah, different personality, mate. And then you had Jordan Janicevic, big bald-headed guy that looked like a world bodybuilding champion, quiet as a mouse. But he'd be able to pick you up in one hand and go, what did you just say? I mean, he never lost his temper or anything, but such a massive, powerful man from the steam engine days. He used to tell stories of things. But, yeah, great. It was great, mate, the different nationalities.
As an aside, of course, it wasn't just talking with them and hearing some of their stories, but also it was their food, because you got to understand, you know, Australia as a whole had pretty ordinary food until this influx of a lot of different nationalities. So, of course, here I am, you know, at night, afternoon shift at Mile End, and people are starting to bring their crib out in the mess room there, and there's all these different smells and flavours, and I got to sample a few things. So it's that whole wide experience. You know, it wasn't just the job, it was the people, how they talked and acted. You know, a fantastic experience, and that really helped build a foundation for me as I then moved through the ranks and did lots of other different things. It was very, very good learning exercise. That first 5 years of my railway life, most valuable, you know, shunting and signalman and all those different jobs. Very interesting.
Yeah, it would have been amazing, mate. And you know what, even now, like back in Melbourne, very multicultural city, you know, like a lot of students from overseas living in Melbourne. But when you think about it, yeah, there may be a few more different cultures in Australia, but really hasn't changed much. Really, when you think about it, we just probably take more notice of it now. I mean, there's probably definitely certain areas have built up over the years, but we've always had that, and it really is interesting. It creates, like you said, exactly, mate. Like I used to I'd bring out my sandwiches. Like I just have a sandwich and I look over at my driver and I'd be like, the heck is he eating? He's got Metwurst, he's got cheese, he's got this. I went, oh, geez, you know, like it was, I'm sitting there drooling over what he's eating.
Yeah. And that, just so we keep it in context, at that same period of time, I'd become more and more involved with the Railway Museum, which in those days was actually part of the Mile End Rail Yards and all those private sidings, if you remember, Andy, used to be Railway Terrace. So I became an active volunteer with the Mile End Railway Museum way back about 68. I started there, and And here we are today. I'm now the executive officer with the National Railway Museum, and I've spent virtually once a week for 53 years involved with the Railway Museum. So there's
Wow.
and I don't mean from a train enthusiast point of view solely. I mean, my interest was more about, again, historically researching different things, uh, and 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 also why were certain decisions made. So it wasn't just like chasing trains. I mean, I did all that stuff too, but it was more about why decisions were made, why certain decisions were made. And of course, that led me into recording a whole lot of stuff and being involved with some book publishing. And even today, I think it's very interesting in regards to tracing back history. And there's a whole lot of history in South Australia with gauge problems and all sorts of takeovers between the state government and the federal government, and then the creation of Australian Rail Track Corporation. So having worked through those transitions, but also knowing all of the key people involved and how they were influenced politically in the beginning, all very interesting stuff. Very, very
Wow.
interesting.